Hi, welcome to Yoga for Hips. So really good class today if you tend to experience discomfort in your hips or in your lower back, going through lots of poses to try and open everything up for you a little bit. So we're going to come started in a seated position, and all you'll need today is a block if you have one and a couple of cushions, so 2 or 3 cushions will be fine. So you're welcome to sit on top of a cushion if that feels better in a cross leg, and have a cushion underneath each knee. So if your knees are quite high up, if sitting cross-legged can be a bit uncomfortable, then feel free to kind of bend your cushions and fill in that gap so that your legs can open up and relax a little bit, and that will help for the hips to begin to open. So grabbing those cushions if you like them, and you're welcome even if you're fairly open in this pose to use the cushions anyway, provide that little bit of extra support. So you can either have the legs crossed or you can have one foot in front of the other. That's a bigger hip opener. Go with what feels good. And then allowing your eyes to close, just taking a couple of minutes at the beginning of class. Let the hands fall down onto the thighs or the knees, wherever feels comfortable. And allowing yourself to kind of draw inwards in the body a little bit, noticing what's going on around the hip area for you, what's going on in your lower back. Maybe you've been experiencing some discomfort here. Maybe that's why you've chosen this class. So where is it that you're feeling this? What's it like? And what has it been feeling like for you when you've been feeling uncomfortable there? It can be really tough when the hips or the lower back are feeling sore and uncomfortable. Almost every movement in the body goes through this area. It's kind of our little core, our central core of the body. So when it doesn't feel comfortable, it affects every single thing that we do. And particularly if you've been doing a lot of sitting for work, then the hips and the lower back can get really tight. As you're sitting here, maybe finding if there's any space for the hips to relax a little bit more, maybe for the knees to open a little more. The hips are also a place that tend to hold a lot of emotional stress, so very much like the shoulders and the neck, how they can get tight and uncomfortable when we're stressed and when we've got a lot going on, the hips tend to do the same. Sometimes it's less obvious that they're doing all that holding until the lower back starts to really complain or until we feel discomfort through the hips. So noticing today that there may be not only physical stress and discomfort being held in the hips, but maybe also emotional stress and discomfort as well. So being mindful of that as we're working to release tension. Knowing what might be held in that area of the body for you. Maybe for the next couple of breaths, inhaling, seeing if you can find some broadness through the chest. And then exhaling, imagining the hip bones sinking kind of down and away from each other on the ground. And the knees opening down and away. One more time, inhaling, getting a feeling of expanding through the front of the body. Exhaling, sinking down and away through the hips, through the knees. And then keeping the eyes closed, changing the cross of the legs, so whichever way around you've got them, taking them the other way. And taking a few breaths here as well. So this might be the way that doesn't feel quite natural. It's probably not the way your body chose to sit. And that's why it can be really good to just encourage the body to experience this different way of being to what it normally would pick. We tend to be kind of dominant with our movements, one side or the other. And so when it comes to opening the hips, allowing everything to be as even as possible, you'll probably find today that there's one hip that is tighter than the other. That's really normal. So going into today's class, feeling curious about your body and exploring what's going on for you, and just taking each pose as far as it feels good. So genuinely choosing what it is that your body needs today rather than what position it is that your mind feels it should be in. Allowing your body to lead the way today, to be the decider. And on your next inhale, allowing your eyes to open. So removing any cushions from underneath the knees and coming into our first pose. So a couple of options with this pose, and please feel free to go with the one that feels good and feels right for you. So bringing the soles of the feet to the ground and starting by taking the right foot underneath the left leg and then bringing that leg to the ground. So the knee's going to be kind of roughly pointing forwards and the foot's going to be coming back. So both hip bones are grounded here, the foot's outside of the hip. And then seeing what it feels like to bring that left foot over the right leg. So if that feels too intense, then don't worry about it, you can leave it where it is. Seeing what it might feel like to bring that foot outside of the right leg. And as you do that, you might find that you start to notice an opening through the left hip. So if your hips are very tight, this might feel really intense already. So taking a couple of breaths, you can interlace your fingers around the knee and settling in here, just kind of listening into your body. How big does that stretch feel? Do you feel that that's about what your body wants today? Do you feel quite open on the outside of the hip, and do you maybe need a little bit more? Option to add in a twist onto this. So if you want to add in a twist, again, you can stay exactly where you are, fingers interlaced around the shin. If you'd like to add in the twist, then you're bringing the right elbow to the outside of that left knee. So this is quite a deep twist. The left hand is coming behind the body to help maneuver you into that twist. And as you do that, you'll notice that there's a little bit of an increase in the stretch. So having a little play there if you want to, and seeing how that's feeling. If you want to take this a little further, if you still want a little bit more in that left hip, again, feeling into your body, you can come back to the center at any time. Then you're welcome to stack the knees. So that means lifting this left foot from the ground and it's coming behind you just as the right one is, and then stacking the knees. So the knees don't need to, to meet. There can be a gap. There is for me, there is going to be for most of us. The hip bones are both grounded on the floor and they're in between the feet. And as soon as you get into this position, you'll notice there's a lot more going on. So not only does that increase in the left hip, but you may also start to feel stuff in the right hip and in the front of the right thigh as well. So you can interlace your fingers around the knee here and have a little think how that feels in this position. So if you get into this position and it's really not feeling good, then feel free to kind of lean back on the hand a little bit and bring that foot to the ground. I'm going to stay wherever you are for a couple of breaths, seeing if you can breathe into the areas that are feeling really tight. Maybe you want to bring your eyes to close so that you can kind of draw your attention inwards. Sometimes, especially if we're in poses that are uncomfortable, which hip opening poses can be, it can be tempting to kind of want to fidget and look around the room and distract yourself. And, that's okay. It's really normal to want to do that. But maybe seeing if you can allow your eyes to close so that you can come just to thinking about your breath. So breathing in, imagining space in those areas that are tight. And exhaling, almost imagining the tight fibres kind of moving away from each other, visualising a bit of extra room being created. And using a kind of a breath that's quite deep through the mouth. You can take some sighs here if you want with the mouth open. So these kind of deep sighing breaths are really good for getting into tight places. Taking one more breath here if you can. If you come into your cow face legs, that means both legs are bent like this, then gently bringing that left foot down. And then if you've taken the left leg across, or if you're taking the twist, coming back to the centre, and you can bring the left leg back to its kind of normal position, hands behind the body, and right leg also comes down. And if you're like me, you'll want to straighten out those legs, and give them a really good shake on the mat. Maybe you want to even take some circles with the ankles. And then let's leave the legs straight for a while, because that can feel quite intense. And taking the legs wide, so as wide as feels comfortable here. And then option to either bring the hands behind the body, so helping to bring the chest forward. So you might have a bit of rounding through the spine here if your hips or your lower back are tight, or if you've got very tight hamstrings. So do feel free to bring the hands behind the body and using them to bring the chest forward. So still getting into the inside of the legs here, into the hips. If you're comfortable sitting up and you're not feeling like you're getting rounding in the spine, you can bring the hands either inside the legs or onto the legs. And we're just going to have a couple of breaths here. If you want to, you can take a bit of a forward fold. So leading with the chest here, if you're taking your forward fold, maybe there's space to come down onto elbows, or maybe you want to grab a bind around the big toe. But not worrying too much about taking a forward fold if that doesn't feel good. So if you notice as you're taking it that your chin's starting to tuck and you're leading with your chin and your forehead and then coming down in this kind of really rounded arch, then just go back to wherever the spine feels like it can be long. Even if that's hands behind the body, that's completely fine. So just giving the legs and the hips a little break here, whilst also doing a little bit of opening. Before we get ready to come on to the other side. So one more breath wherever you are. And then if you've taken a forward fold, you can walk your hands back in, bringing a hand underneath each knee and back to centre, feet on the ground. So we'll go the opposite way this time to what we did before. So picking up that left foot underneath the right leg and then bringing it down to the ground. So the left knee's pointing forward and the foot's behind. And then you can bring that right foot outside of the left knee and have a little interlace around the shin and get a feel for how it is on this side. So chances are this side might feel really quite different. It might be a lot tighter, it might be a lot looser. So having a little feel, seeing what it's like. So again, no pressure to feel like you have to do any particular variation of this pose. Every variation gets into a slightly different part of the hips. So it'll really depend where you are tight today as to which one is the right one for you. You can take that twist if you want, so holding onto the knee with the left hand. Just to start with, bringing the right hand behind the body, or you can bring, as we did before, that elbow to the outside of the knee. So that's if you feel like having a little twist would be helpful, if that's feeling good for you. And then there's the option to come into your cow face legs. So if you're doing the cow face legs, then you're lifting that foot from the ground, and that's also coming to point backwards. You might need to have a little shuffle around on your hips, and the knees are stacking. Again, don't worry about the knees having to be together. They absolutely don't have to be. And, you know, for some bodies, this just won't be a comfortable position. It won't be a possible position. So, you know, if you're trying to get into this and it feels like you're folding yourself up like a pretzel and it's ridiculous, then don't even worry. Step out and go back to the other one. So working with what your body needs and what your body is asking for today. So wherever you are, seeing if you can maybe allow the eyes to close. And as you begin to sit in this pose, perhaps you get that feeling of opening out in the hips. Sometimes these poses feel really intense from the off, and sometimes they kind of like sneak up on us a little bit, so they can feel quite comfy at the beginning, and then after a few breaths, they begin to feel quite intense. So there's no wrong or right way to experience these things, really breathing into whatever's going on for you. Noticing if there's any resistance in the body, if there's any kind of battle going on, where the body doesn't want to let go, where you're still kind of tensing and tightening the hips, noticing if you're doing that. If there's any clenching of the glutes, of the buttocks. If there is, seeing if you can let these go. Using your breath, helping yourself to find a bit of space. Staying here for a couple more breaths if you can. On your next inhale, if you've taken cow face legs, then bringing that right foot, really carefully holding onto the knee, to be flat on the floor. If you've taken your twist, coming back to center. And then otherwise, lifting that right leg to the other side. And then hands come behind the body so that you can open up the left leg as well. And then legs out in front. And really good shake with the legs. Feel free to shake away as much as feels good. You can take that circle or the windscreen wipers with the feet as well. And then if you want to, you can open the legs wide again. Maybe keeping the hands behind the body this time, unless you feel sort of really comfortable to come into your forward fold. So just giving the legs a little opportunity to open up. You can take some kind of flexes and points with the feet. And then hand underneath each knee, bringing the legs together and finding a way onto all fours. So once you get there, taking some nice big circles with the hips. So this is in any way that feels good for you. There's really not a kind of a right or wrong. You can go a few times one way, a few times the other way. You can kind of stay and pause. So if you feel that you get part way around the circle and you think that a particular spot needs a bit more time, then feel free to pause there. You can rock there. So having a little feel into what your body needs. It's going to be different for everyone. Maybe it's a bit different to what I'm doing with mine. And then finding a way back to center. Tucking the toes underneath, coming into downward facing dog from here. So checking first of all that the hands are definitely still under the shoulders, that the wrist creases are pointing towards the front of the mat and the palms are kind of comfortably open wide. And then you can press through the hands, through the feet, lifting the hips. Maybe you want to start off with a nice bend in the knees so that you can kind of find a bit of length through the lower back. And let your head be heavy, bringing the gaze to the back of the mat or in between the legs. And maybe a little pedal with the feet. So as you exhale, you're bringing one of the heels down, coming up onto the toe of the other foot. And then inhaling toes of both feet, exhaling the other heel down. So maybe you come through this pedal one more time, opening up the back of the legs. And this can feel quite nice after you've done all those kind of folding in leg poses that we've just been doing. And then back to centre, either legs straight or knees bent, whatever feels best. Option to stay here, or if you'd like to, you can lift the right leg up. It can be any amount. And then bending the right knee and opening the hips, so maybe the gaze comes underneath your right arm. Grounding down equally into the hands if you can. Inhaling back to centre, keeping the leg lifted. Up onto the left toes and step that foot forward all the way if you can in between the hands. So you can use your hands to kind of help it get there. You can take a few steps. It doesn't have to come in one go. And then lowering down the back knee. You can keep the toes tucked if you prefer. Bringing the hands to the ground. So taking a low lunge here. Opening up the front of the hip. So if this already feels quite intense, having the front of the hip open, then staying here. If you'd like to open up the front of the hip a little bit more, then you can kind of walk the right hand up onto the knee, bring the block underneath your left hand, so that's underneath your left shoulder. So the block might be this way round, or it might be lengthways, so it just depends what's feeling good for you today. So have a little play both ways. And then you're going to bend through that back knee, lifting the foot, and reach back with the right hand. Now maybe there's space for you to catch the foot, and if there is, then feel free to catch it. If there isn't space to catch the foot, don't worry about it. If you've got the block, you can come up a little higher on the block. That'll give you a little bit more reach. So that's an option to try. And if you're already up high on the block and it doesn't feel good catching the foot, then just bring the arm to reach back and bring the foot up. And don't worry if they don't kind of link up together, that's fine. So see what feels good, but feel free to use the block lengthways or widthways, and obviously the higher the block, the more reach you'll get. You're welcome to go without the block altogether if you want, but it can be a nice addition just to help you reach the foot if you'd like to have that extra reach. And here sinking down the hips if you can. As you sink the hips down, you'll notice that the stretch increases. So having a little play around here, again, seeing what's best for you, what feels good. Stay in here for a couple more breaths. And then releasing that foot whenever feels good. Turn the body back to center. You can bring the hand to the thigh. Slowly and carefully bringing the foot down. And then bringing the hands down to the ground, moving the block off to the side. Keeping that left hand underneath the left shoulder and bringing the right hand to the right knee, rolling onto the little toe edge of that right foot as you open the knee to the side. Maybe you begin to also look over the right elbow or over to the right. So a little opening on the hip here. And then inhaling back to center. Hands both down by the ground. You can either come into all fours and then to downward facing dog, or if you want to, with the toes tucked under, you can lift the knee and go straight back into downward facing dog. So up to you how you get there, finding your way back when you're ready. On your inhale, option to lift that left leg up, any amount, curling up, grounding down through the right heel. And then bending the knee and opening up the hip. Maybe the gaze comes underneath the right arm. So seeing if you can ground down through both hands here, keeping everything nice and balanced and even. Inhaling back to center, straightening out the leg, rising up onto the right toes, creating a bit of space, and then bringing that left foot forward in between the hands. When you're ready, feel free to take as many steps as you want using your hand if you want. Lowering down that back knee, keeping the hands to the ground. You can keep the toes tucked under if you wish. And kind of sinking through that right hip, taking a little moment here. And then grabbing hold of that block, so that's going to come underneath the right hand this time, so right hand's underneath the shoulder on the block. Left hand comes up to the thigh, and then bending through the back knee. And again, maybe you reach back with the left hand, maybe you kind of hover the hand, maybe you catch the foot, so you can hold onto the foot on the inside or the outside, whatever feels most natural. And of course, do feel free to come up onto the higher end of that block, bringing the block a little bit further in, and that will give you a bit more reach. Don't worry if you can't catch the foot, that's not the end of the world. So having a little play around and seeing what feels good for you. Taking one more breath here. And then lowering down the hands to the ground, removing the block to the side. And then right hand comes down underneath the right shoulder, bringing the left hand to the left knee, opening up little toe edge of the foot, opening up the knee to the left hand side. Maybe the gaze comes over that left elbow. Inhaling back to center, both hands down to the ground, and then option to either come back to all fours first. So if you're coming back to all fours first, you're bringing the knee back to all fours, then tucking the toes underneath and up into downward facing dog. Otherwise, you're lifting that back knee and stepping the foot all the way back. So meeting in downward facing dog for another breath. And then walking the hands, the feet slowly forwards to meet the hands. Once you get there, bringing the feet as wide as the mat, so nice and wide. And then a hand inside each elbow, taking a kind of a ragdoll forward fold, so the whole of the upper body is super heavy, really relaxed. You can take a little sway here, side to side. And then allowing the hands to come down to the ground so you can bend the knees slightly to get them there. Just to bring the heels in slightly, so the toes are out, the heels are in. And then grabbing hold of your block, popping that behind the body and lowering down into Malasana squat. So you can do this without the block. The block's quite nice if you want to kind of take a bit of pressure off. You can bring the hands together in prayer in front of the heart. And then using the elbows inside the knees, almost kind of helping the knees to open up. So the chest is drawing forwards right close to the hands if you can. If you'd like to take Malasana squat without the brick there, then you can absolutely do that. And you're also welcome to come up onto the toes. So if it doesn't feel good to have the heels down, then you can come up onto the toes as well. And if you want that extra bit of support, then of course do pop a cushion underneath the heels and then they can kind of relax a little bit. So lots of options here again. You can be sitting on the block, you can have the block removed and the heels down, drawing the chest forward no matter where you are, or you can be up on the toes, and you can pop something underneath the heels. If you want more stability, always feel free to bring the hands down, taking 2 more breaths wherever you are. And then removing the blocks if you have them, bringing the hands behind the body, and you might want to kind of bring the legs out straight and take that little shake with the legs like we did at the beginning. And then scooting to about halfway up your mat, lowering down onto your back. So don't worry if Malasana squat feels a bit uncomfortable and just not an easy pose for you. You're not alone in that. Western lifestyles do not make squatting feel easy for us. It's something that's really, really good for the body though. So if you are able to start practicing it, even with it's just with the block, or if you're on your toes, then giving something like that a go as often as you can will really help to kind of begin to open the hips and get everything loosened up around the pelvis, which is really helpful if you're getting a tight lower back in particular. So keeping the feet flat on the floor here, the knees bent, coming into a little figure 4 stretch for the hips. So lifting up the right foot from the ground and then opening up the right knee, bringing the right ankle onto the left thigh. So it might be that once you get here, you're already noticing this feels like quite a big hip opener. And particularly if your knee is quite far towards your body and isn't able to open very far, then I'd suggest that maybe you stay where you are and you allow the body to open up from here. So maybe you kind of use your hand to provide a little bit of resistance to help open that knee. If the knee's really comfortably open here, then you're welcome to lift the left foot from the ground and then interlace fingers either behind the thigh or behind the shins. So whichever one you pick, the head is staying on the ground and the chest is staying open. So if you notice that in order to link the fingers around, say the shin, for example, that your head has to be up and your shoulders have to be all caved in, then taking a step back and interlacing behind the thigh instead. And then still getting a sense of that knee opening up away from the body. And if you still need a little bit more, if your hips are feeling super open in this pose, then you can draw the foot further up towards the hips. That's the right foot further up towards the hips. For me, it feels really good having it at the top. This is a perfectly good stretch. It feels pretty intense like this. But if you do want a bit more, then of course you can move that foot further up. And then allowing your eyes to close. Breathing into that right hip. So really good pose if you tend to experience either lower back pain or sciatica. So this is a really great pose for both of those things. And it's a great preventative as well. So if you know that you've experienced lower back discomfort in the past or sciatica in the past, and you're kind of trying to have some kind of like maintenance stretches to prevent it coming back, then this is a great way to do that. And you can absolutely spend a few minutes on each side in this place. So taking a couple more breaths here for today's practice. Again, visualizing space opening up in that right hip, if you can. If you've lifted that left foot, then letting go of the fingers to allow the foot to come down to the ground. And then using your hand to bring that right knee back in. And then the right foot comes down to the ground. And then up to you here, you may want to have another little shake out through the legs. Or you may want to take a little kind of windscreen wiper of the legs from side to side, so allowing them to kind of gently rock side to side. This is quite a nice release for the hips and the lower back doing this one. And then back to centre when you're ready, coming on to the other side. So lifting up the left foot, left ankle onto right thigh. And opening up that hip away from the body. So again, if you're noticing that that knee's really close to the body and it's super, super tight, then keep that right foot on the ground, using the hand to kind of gently begin to open up that knee just to where it feels comfortable. If your knee feels comfortably open there, the hips feel good, then you can begin to lift that right foot from the floor, potentially interlacing fingers around the back of the thigh or around the back of the shins. So don't assume that it will be the same as the other side. You might find that one hip in this position feels a lot tighter than the other. So adjust as you need to. And then maybe allowing your eyes to close just so you can help draw that attention inward again. And using those exhales in particular on your breath to create a little bit of space. And again, check that you're not holding on to anything in the hips. Seeing if you can get them as relaxed, as spacious as you possibly can. Still getting a sense of that left knee drawing out and away. Couple more breaths in this pose. Noticing what's going on in your body. Which hip was the tighter one? How did they feel? And then if you've lifted that foot, releasing the fingers, lowering the right foot down, and really gently bringing that left leg back to centre. So you can take that shape through the legs, or you can take the windscreen wiper through the legs. And as your legs come over to the right, allowing them to come down a little bit further to the ground, maybe you bring your gaze over the left shoulder. So coming into a little spinal twist to finish off. You can bring that left arm out if you want, or up into a cactus position. So up to you here how far you want to take the twist. On your next inhale, bringing your head to centre, legs come to centre, and then exhaling, the legs come over to the left-hand side this time. Then you can open up that right arm if you want, or bring it into that cactus shape. So spinal twists, also really good for the lower back, really good for spinal health in general. Couple more breaths in this pose. And then on your inhale, head back to centre and legs back to centre, opening up into Shavasana. So if you've had any discomfort in your lower back, then I suggest getting your 2 cushions. You definitely want one beneath the knees and one beneath the head. So having a cushion beneath the knees if you're lying on your back will help to look after and support the lower back. So if you tend to sleep on your back, then seeing if you can grab a cushion to go underneath your knees at night. If you're a side sleeper and if you'd prefer to be on your side at the moment, then making sure that you've got a cushion in between the knees instead. So below, underneath the knees if you're on your back, and in between the knees if you're on your side. So the point of having the cushion in between the knees on the side is to see if you can keep the hips level so they're not collapsing in on each other. So that helps to look after the back. If you tend to sleep on your front, it's a little more tricky. It's not the best position for the lower back, but these are 2 ways that you can at least look after your back if you're a side or a back sleeper. So find your kind of comfy space for Shavasana, either on your side or on your back. And wherever you are, seeing if you can get a sense of openness through the body and seeing if you can find that relaxation through the hips, through the glutes. So checking in particular that the glutes and the buttocks are not holding on, they're not tightening up or tensing. Imagining space through that whole of the mid part of the body, the lower back, the hips, the hip flexors. Allowing your eyes to close if they're not already. And with each exhale, noticing particularly the hip area grounding down further into the earth, becoming heavy, rooting you down. In yoga, the hip area is known as the root of the body. And it kind of makes sense when you think about how it is an area where there is a lot of grounding with the earth. And also when you think about how all the movements in the body come through the hips. So whether you're on your side or your back, allowing yourself to feel rooted down through the hips, almost as if that particular area is getting heavier and heavier, drawing down into the ground. And maybe it pulls the rest of the body with it, the rest of the body melts down, it lets go. Allowing yourself to completely release here. And stay in here for as long as it feels good today. Feel free to take a couple more minutes. Noticing how different your body feels now. How your lower back feels. How your hips feel. Thank you for joining me in this hip and lower back opening sequence today. Namaste.